I'm the oddball out here today, so I'm starting on a topic that probably most of you have never worked with. Is there anybody here that's involved in TFCAs? Okay, 2 people. What I'm just going to do is present a new system that has been developed by SADC and that has been accepted by all of the member parties to SADC, including South Africa. So we need to start implementing this. And I thought this was a good forum to come to because KZN is managing 2 of the 6 TFCAs in South Africa. Unfortunately, they put me in a session where only stewardship people are. We'll see how it goes. The TFCAs are an interesting thing because it's a fairly new thing and we kind of are winging it as we go along and finding out what we're doing wrong and finding out what we're doing right. There's a lot of things that we are doing right, but because there is no formal M&E system, we can't really advertise what we're doing right. So what SADC did was to do a situation analysis, and what they found was that there's IUCN guidelines and there's SADC guidelines, but it doesn't address monitoring and evaluation in TFCAs, and it's a bit of a tricky thing. There's no existing comprehensive framework for M&E of TFCA initiatives. There are M&E initiatives, but they're not comprehensive. They have certain very serious gaps. And the findings of the report also said that the legal framework for TFCAs and their establishment and progress is set in international law, African and regional law, and it is set on 3 pillars: economic management, environmental management, regional integration, and socio-economic development. Because we're not talking of the protected areas, we're also talking of the areas around that has been declared part of the TFCA. Okay, this is interesting. My screen doesn't move the same way as that one. Right. The one M&E framework that we had that kind of operated was called the Performance Assessment Tool. It was accepted by SADC in 2013, but it never went through the political process of being formalized. This is basically what it looked at. It had 8 key performance areas, and it had indicators for each performance area. The only TFCAs that I know that have ever been evaluated by this is the ones that South Africa shares with its neighboring countries. None of the others have gone through this. And until very recently, the park managers have actually not even been involved in the assessment process. So it's been very much a we think this is what's happening kind of situation. This is basically what the performance assessment tool looked at. It was very heavily biased towards assessing the governance of the TFCA with a little bit of resources, benefits, and business, which is a bit weighted. It also only assesses the TFCA. The monitoring and evaluation framework went further. It actually looked at assessing the SADC program. This is the strategic objectives it's covering. There are 8 components. 7 of the components comes out of the SADC TFCA program strategic objectives that were set by SADC. The other component comes out of the 2 protocols that we have, the 2 biggest protocols in biodiversity. It's the wildlife conservation and law enforcement protocol and the forestry protocol. So they took the protocols that actually implement biodiversity conservation and they took those objectives and worked it into the M&E framework. The framework is based on 3 pillars. It's environmental conservation, activities, regional integration, and socio-economic development. Now, if you look at the METT system basically looks at the environmental conservation part. And it only looks at that part that you implement in the protected area. Whereas the TFCA looks at the bigger area that is being managed as a TFCA. The M&E framework covers 3 tiers of assessment. The first tier is the SADC TFCA unit. In other words, the unit in SADC that manages the whole SADC program. There are specific objectives that evaluate how effective that program is functioning. The second tier evaluates certain elements of the TFCA coordinating agency, which basically in South Africa would be DIA, and as well as certain aspects of the SADC TFCA unit. And then the third tier evaluates what happens in every TFCA. So you have 3 different, totally different monitoring and evaluation activities that come together in one framework. The M&E framework is based on 5 elements that they are looking at and that they want to monitor. One is cooperation. It is very important that the TFCA as a unit cooperates, and the cooperation, the effectiveness of the cooperation is evaluated. Good governance. How does the 2 units from 2 countries or 3 units from 3 countries operate together? Environmental protection, how effective is the environmental protection? How effectively do you manage your resources? Sustainable development, the areas around the protected areas are particularly important to develop sustainably, and where we need to propagate the kind of development that would not impact negatively on the protected area. And the last one is the golden goblet that nobody's ever managed to catch, and that's sustainable financing. We need to find ways of sustainably financing TFCAs, and it is a real challenge. But we need to evaluate how far we get and what works and what doesn't work. This is basically what the life cycle of the M&E framework looks like. It's a 5-year cycle that starts anew after every 5 years. There's an information flow, and this time the monitoring and evaluation information flow starts with the TFCAs and then flows down to the SADC TFCA unit. In other words, your activities and your monitoring starts in the TFCAs and then it flows down to the SADC unit. We need to start as a country looking at how we are going to implement this. We have negotiated with SADC that 2 TFCAs that has a South African component get training. The third one is KwaZulu, which we are not involved in. And the 2 that will get training is Lebombo and ARTP, IJsrigtersveld. What we now need to do is to see how we duplicate that training in our other TFCAs. Thank you. We need to discuss implementation at the PMC level, at the Park Management Committee level, and then take it further from there. And this process needs to be tested because it has never been tested and it has a few challenges. the possible challenges are that we are evaluating TFCAs as cross-border units. Now, if you look at Namibia, Namibia has 2 TFCAs. The one is with South Africa, and the other one is with Angola and Zimbabwe and Zambia and Botswana. So each TFCA will be evaluated on its own. Those evaluations feed into their national unit evaluation, and each one will influence it in a different way. And then that needs to feed into the SADC evaluation. We have 6 TFCAs, which really complicates the process. Time and resources. For instance, we would not be able to go through that cycle for each TFCA every year. At the moment, with a performance assessment tool, we're looking at 2 TFCAs every year. How is that going to influence the rest of the evaluation down the line? We need to look as SADC countries at setting systems in place to coordinate all of these different evaluations, and how do we get them to feed into each other and feed into the process. We also need to very seriously look at who is driving which part of the M&E, and we need to very seriously coordinate it with the METT process, because the METT process needs to feed into the SADC M&E framework so that we do not duplicate, but that we just add on to it. And very lastly, the possible way forward would be to finalize and organize the training for Lubombo and ARTP, to draw up a national implementation plan where the management authorities of the TFCAs will be critical, to initiate the process, to identify implementation issues, and to feed information to SADC to inform any review process that they have going. End of story. Anybody that wants the documents, that's my email. Email me and I will send it to you.